Well, I'd like to take you to a remote part of Australia. I'd like to take you north of the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, can I just have a quick show of hands who in the audience actually lives in that part of the world? A few people, very good. Now, it makes up more than 50% of the land mass of Australia, but only 5% of the population live there. And once you get away from the Queensland coastline, it becomes even less. And we have a very large indigenous population. Now, more than 50% of the sea exports of Australia leave the ports of Northern Australia, so it makes a very important contribution to the accounts of the nation. We have some phenomenal natural resources upon which that economic contribution is built. And I'd just like to show you some pictures just to get you into the scene. So we've got fantastic savanna landscapes stretching 3,700 kilometers east to west. We've got those support vast grazing properties. We've got fantastic rivers. 55% of the available of the rainfall that falls in Australia falls in the north, and of course you have all heard about the opportunities associated with that. We've got fantastic coastlines, very attractive to tourism, and of course along the coasts are also important fisheries. Now, we've heard about the population decline, and while it's patchy, some of these regional communities and regional towns are doing it tough, others are doing a bit better. Importantly, we have a large indigenous population, and many of the traditional owners of Northern Australia live on country. Now, to think through the question of what is generating prosperity and how can we possibly do better, I've used an aspect of the livelihoods framework to help organize the thoughts. Now, what we are seeing traditionally is a development model and a model of creating wealth and prosperity that is almost entirely centered on the natural resources, the natural assets of the region, both renewable resources but also non-renewable resources. And all the other assets, all the other ways of contributing to livelihoods, be they the people and the skills, the physical assets such as roads, water infrastructure, power infrastructure, governance systems, all of that channels a lot of the energy and a lot of the way of generating prosperity through natural resources. Now, mining, you're all familiar with the mining situation in Australia. We've got a lot of mining activity scattered across the north. From the coal mines in the east to the bauxite mines in the north, to the ore mines in the Kimberley and Pilbara on the west, and then of course ore and precious metal mines in northwest Queensland. Now, all of that makes a tremendous contribution through those exports. The question is, does it actually generate a lot of prosperity in those remote areas? And yes, it does, of course. There's employment, there is supply industries, there's processing industries, there's transport associated with those industries. But what we are increasingly seeing is that this employment is not local. It is long-distance commuters that are taking a lot of these jobs, and a lot of mining companies preferentially employ fly-in, fly-out workers because of the ease of management and because it's much easier to recruit people remotely. So what's mining going to look like moving forward? There is lots of opportunities. Of course, mining is built on the depletion of specific natural resources, so there's always a lifetime built into any mining operation. But there's a lot of exploration activity happening. It's expensive, it's got long time lags, but there's still lots of opportunity out there. Of course, if you look at the opportunities for cost savings for mines through automation, mining is right at the forefront of those developments. The most prominent industry in Northern Australia, of course, is beef cattle production, and again, it makes a significant contribution to the national accounts. Now, what we have seen, and I've just given you a few data for northwest Queensland on those graphics, is we have seen a consolidation of enterprises. We have seen an agglomeration, we have seen diversification on a north-south trajectory, so businesses can mitigate against climate risk and take opportunities of different growing conditions. We have seen that stocking rates, the number of cattle per hectare of square kilometers, firstly are very low. You would run on average in these landscapes 2 beasts per square kilometre. In Tasmania you would have 2 beasts per hectare, just as a comparison. And those stocking rates haven't changed much. If anything, they've gone down a little bit. Now, some enterprises have managed to intensify through better production systems and access to water resources to support extensive grazing with irrigated grazing, but there have been limitations, area limitations to this. What you have seen at the same time, interestingly, is that land values have gone up quite sharply from, on average, about $20 per hectare in the 90s to about $100 per hectare in the very recent past. And that's been driven a lot by real estate speculation in that space. And that, I say it's speculation specifically in the context that we have seen the profitability of grazing production from land not shift much. It's been around 2.5% of rate of return rate of return, and we have seen farm cash income stagnate or even decline on a per hectare basis with a very high volatility coefficient of variation of about 94%. Now, a lot of talk these days is around irrigated agriculture. Now, I've already mentioned that about 60% of available rainfall falls in the north, and you have this nice background slide of the order of irrigation area. So, it conjures up images of new dams scattered through the landscape, new little orias emerging throughout Australia. How realistic is this? Now, CSIRO has done a series of studies in that space, and this slide shows you that there is lots of places where hypothetically dams could be built to capture some of that runoff water that is generated in the north. The dark blue spots are those that can capture more water. The yellow ones would be smaller dams. And I've had the privilege to be part of a study that explored the feasibility of one of those locations in the Cloncurry River catchment. Now, a dam needs to provide water security, and it needs to provide reliability of supply if there is to be an irrigation scheme or a supply scheme attached. Now, if you look at this slide, you see that rainfall is very sporadic, river flows are very sporadic, and not evenly distributed through time. So that means that the storage has to be pretty big if it wants to achieve water security and reliability of supply. So once you then establish what a dam could actually reliably supply given the water resources available, but also given the environmental regulations that are given by like the water plan, you can then work out how much a dam may cost to deliver a benefit cost ratio of about 1. So we've got land available. We know that there's crops available that can be grown and that are quite profitable. But the question is, in that location, can you build a dam for $120 million capex? That would have a benefit cost ratio of about one, and be profitable to investors. The answer in that case is likely not, specifically if you got a township downstream and the dam is classified as high flood risk, which then increases the requirements for engineering. The other issues with irrigation development are that a lot of these schemes might not be terribly large. If you look at the ability of schemes to cope with pests and diseases, if you look at the capability of current landholders, which are mainly cattle graziers, to implement irrigation schemes, if you look at the necessary conversion of leasehold land to freehold land that needs to be associated with that, there's a lot of limitations to that potential development and a lot of hurdles to be cleared. Tourism is a nature-based industry, I would argue. Now, there's many different tourist products across Northern Australia. In the Northern Territory, we've got mainly short-term international visitors. In other parts, it's more self-drive tourists. And not all tourism is very glossy. I was part of a study into the benefits and costs of tourism in the Gulf of Carpentaria in Queensland a little while ago. And while the regional community really appreciates the economic benefits and also some of the social benefits generated by tourism, they saw a whole swag of environmental detrimental impacts generated by tourism that were largely unmanaged. So the question then is, how do we manage tourism for maximum benefit for the regional community? We can do that by understanding who the people are that come, how much they spend, what they do, what their preferences are, and from there develop an integrated product and an integrated planning and management framework that gives regions the ability to determine who comes, to the extent that they can positively encourage visitor segments that provide the best opportunities. So what are alternative sources of income from natural resources? And we've already heard about payments for ecosystem services, specifically through carbon sequestration. And that is also very much happening in the northern space. It's not sequestration though, it is emission avoidance through savanna burning. And we see specifically Aboriginal people in the wet tropical part of northern Australia participating in savanna burning activities. Now, these activities, there is about 45 currently listed on the Clean Energy Regulator website. A number for 2015, there was $30 million generated in carbon credits And as I said, 45 current projects. The important thing here is this generates income for Aboriginal communities. It also helps with biodiversity conservation. It provides employment, income, self-esteem, connection to country, and importantly, health benefits for Aboriginal communities. Now the question is, can other landholders in the region also participate in ecosystem service payment schemes? And I've been able to explore the notion that glaciers in particular could contribute to the conservation of biodiversity across the tropical savannas, where very little land is in the formal reserve, and very important ecological assets are held on pastoral properties. The question is, would there be a market? And the first sub-question to that is, would there be a supply? And what we found clearly is the answer is yes. People are very interested in participating in contractual biodiversity conservation. It's not just a question of what you would offer people as a payment. It's a question of what would they have to do in return, how would it be administered, how long would the contracts be, would there be ways of helping to mitigate risk, which of course is a very important question in that area. So let me come to my concluding slide. There have been, in the past, very important contributions made by natural resource-based industries. Those opportunities will continue to exist into the future, but my argument is we really need to broaden the perspective. Instead of looking at just natural resources to generate prosperity, we need to really focus a lot more on the other assets that are available to regions also, in particular on the human resources, on the people that live in those regions, that run businesses in those regions, in their skills, their knowledge, in their ingenuity. There's a lot that these people have to offer, and it's not just through converting natural resources into wealth. I also think we need to start looking not just at the generation of wealth and prosperity. We also need to talk about the well-being of communities as a whole, and by that I mean the livability of those regions, because it's not just about the income that people earn. And as we've heard in previous talks, money is available, jobs are available in many circumstances, but there's other things holding people from skilled workers, skilled professionals into those regions, and it's got to do with the livability of those regions. We need to talk about the multifunctionality of landscapes. It's not just a question of exploiting natural resources. We need to come to a much better appreciation of the ecological services that this region has to offer, not just Australia, but the world, and so it can remain resilient into a climate-challenged future. Thank you.